I'm Mia, and I'm 15. My sister just destroyed my entire life with 3 sentences, and my mother's looking at me like I'm something she scraped off her shoe. She's pregnant, Jessica announced from the living room doorway, her arms crossed with that satisfied smile she gets when she knows she's about to ruin someone's day. With Mr. Davidson's baby. You know, the married guy who owns the hardware store. The silence that followed was so thick I could taste it. Mom's coffee mug hit the kitchen counter with a sharp crack. Dad's newspaper rustled as his grip tightened. And me? I just stood there like an idiot, my backpack still hanging off my shoulder, trying to process what had just happened. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely blindsided by family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Because here's the thing about my family. They never asked questions when Jessica talked. She was 21, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When she spoke, they listened like it was gospel truth coming down from heaven. That's impossible, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But nobody was looking at me anymore. They were all looking at Jessica, hanging on her every word like she was announcing the weather. I saw them together, Jessica continued, her voice gaining confidence with each lie. Behind the hardware store last Thursday after school. They were… She paused dramatically, letting their imaginations fill in the blanks. Mom's face went from confused to disgusted in 3 seconds flat. Mia, her voice cut through the air like a blade. Is this true? No, the word exploded out of me. Mom, I've never even talked to Mr. Davidson except to buy supplies for school projects. This is insane, but the damage was done. I could see it in their faces. That shift from confusion to disappointment to complete revulsion. Jessica had painted the picture, and they were already hanging it on the wall. Don't lie to us, Dad said, standing up from his chair with that particular tone that meant he'd already made up his mind. Your sister wouldn't make something like this up, wouldn't she? Because making things up was basically Jessica's superpower. Like the time she convinced them I'd stolen $20 from her purse when I was 12. Or when she told them I was skipping school to hang out with older boys, which was particularly hilarious since I was too shy to talk to boys my own age. But they never remembered those times. Jessica's lies had a way of evaporating from their memory the moment they served their purpose. Mom, please, I tried again, desperation creeping into my voice. You know me. You know I would never… I thought I knew you, Mom said, her voice thick with disgust. But this? She gestured toward my stomach like she could see something that wasn't there. This is exactly the kind of shameful behavior I've been worried about. The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of nightmare you wake up from, gasping and grateful it wasn't real. Except I wasn't waking up. You've brought shame to this entire family, Mom continued, her words hitting like physical blows. What will people think? What will they say about us? That's when I realized it wasn't really about what I'd supposedly done. It was about how it made them look. Because in our family, image was everything, and I'd just become a stain on their perfect reputation. Jessica watched from the doorway, her expression carefully neutral now, but I caught the tiny smile playing at the corner of her mouth. She was enjoying this. She'd planned this moment, crafted it, and now she was watching it unfold like her own personal soap opera. Pack your things, Dad said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of finality. You can't stay here. The words hit me like a slap. What do you mean, pack my things? You're 15 and pregnant by a married man, Mom said, her voice rising with each word. We will not harbor this kind of behavior under our roof. You've made your choices. But I'm not pregnant, I screamed, my composure finally breaking. I've never even kissed anyone, let alone… This is Jessica lying, like she always does. But they were done listening. Mom had already turned away, her shoulders rigid with disgust. Dad was shaking his head like I was a lost cause. And Jessica? She had the nerve to look sympathetic. Maybe if you tell them the truth about the baby, she said softly, they'll let you come back after it's born. The truth about the baby that didn't exist. The baby she'd invented out of thin air to destroy me. 30 minutes later, I was standing on our front porch with a backpack full of clothes and nowhere to go. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything I'd ever known. I was 15 years old. I'd lost my family, my home, and my childhood in the span of 1 hour. And the worst part? I still couldn't understand why Jessica had done it. But I was about to learn that understanding your family's cruelty doesn't make surviving it any easier. The first night was the worst. I spent it on a bench in Riverside Park, clutching my backpack and jumping at every sound. Every car that passed made me hope it might be Mom or Dad coming to find me, to say they'd made a terrible mistake. The car never came. By morning, I was hungry, cold, and starting to understand that this wasn't temporary. They really meant it. I really was on my own. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who got good grades and followed rules. So walking into the McDonald's on 5th Street to ask for a job felt like stepping into someone else's life. But empty stomach trumps pride every single time. "How old are you, honey?" asked the manager. A tired-looking woman named Sandra with graying hair and kind eyes. 18, I lied smoothly. I'd been practicing that lie for the past hour. Sandra looked me up and down, taking in my rumpled clothes and the desperation I was probably radiating. "Can you start today?" That's how I learned that sometimes people don't ask too many questions when they see someone who needs a break. The job paid minimum wage and came with the understanding that I'd work whatever shifts Sandra needed filled. I mopped floors, cleaned bathrooms, and learned that the phrase, "the customer is always right," is complete garbage when you're dealing with people who treat fast food workers like they're invisible. But it was money, and money meant food. And food meant I could survive another day. I found places to sleep. The 24-hour laundromat on Pine Street had a bathroom where I could wash up. The public library became my daytime refuge. Warm, quiet, and full of books that let me escape from my reality for a few hours. 2 weeks into my new life, I ran into Mrs. Peterson from my old neighborhood. She was coming out of the grocery store when she spotted me coming out of McDonald's in my uniform. "Mia?" Her face crumpled with confusion. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in school?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head, but facing someone who knew me before everything fell apart made my throat tight. "I'm taking a break from school. Working for a while." She looked at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Where are you living, honey? Are your parents okay with this?" The laugh that came out of me was sharp and bitter. "My parents are fine with it." Mrs. Peterson's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Mia, are you living on your own?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything. Mrs. Peterson had always been nice to me, had even helped me with my science project 2 years ago when my parents were too busy with Jessica's college applications. But what was the point? She couldn't fix this. Nobody could. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Really, this is just temporary." She didn't look convinced, but she let me go. I watched her walk to her car, probably going home to her normal family with their normal problems. Meanwhile, I was going back to my shift, because rent on my tiny efficiency apartment wasn't going to pay itself. Oh yeah, did I mention I'd found an apartment? Well, apartment was generous. It was basically a room with a hot plate and a bathroom down the hall that I shared with 3 other tenants. But it was mine. And after 3 weeks of sleeping in parks and laundromats, having 4 walls and a door that locked felt like luxury. The landlord, Mr. Chen, was either incredibly trusting or incredibly desperate for tenants because he didn't ask for references or run credit checks. Cash deposit, first month's rent, and it was mine. "You work?" he asked in broken English when I handed him the money. "Yes, sir. McDonald's on 5th Street. He nodded approvingly. "Good. Work is good. You need anything, you ask." It wasn't much, but it was kindness when I desperately needed it. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the exhaustion or even the loneliness. It was the constant ache of confusion. I still couldn't understand why Jessica had destroyed my life. We'd never been close, but I'd never thought she actively hated me. But lying awake in my tiny room, listening to the sounds of the city through my thin walls, I started to piece together a pattern I'd been too naive to see before. Every time I'd succeeded at something, Jessica had found a way to undermine it. When I made honor roll, she'd mention how easy my classes were compared to her advanced courses. When I got picked for the debate team, she'd joke about how I just liked to argue with everyone. Small things, tiny cuts that I'd brushed off as sibling rivalry. But this wasn't rivalry, this was something else entirely. As I drifted off to sleep in my narrow bed, I made myself a promise. I was going to survive this. And someday, somehow, I was going to understand why Jessica had needed to destroy me to feel good about herself. What I didn't know yet was how much stronger you can become when you have nothing left to lose. By month 3, I'd developed what you might generously call a routine. Up at 5 a.m., shower in the communal bathroom before anyone else woke up. McDonald's by 6 for the breakfast shift. Library from 2 to 6 to study with books I'd borrowed. Evening shift at a gas station convenience store from 7 to midnight. Sleep, rinse, repeat. The gas station job was an education. Let's put it that way. Working overnight in a convenience store in the less desirable part of town teaches you things about humanity that you don't learn in high school civics class. Like how to spot someone who's going to try to rob you. Hint, they spend way too much time looking around and not enough time looking at what they supposedly came to buy. Or how to handle drunk college kids who think it's hilarious to mess with the teenage girl behind the counter. Hint, the panic button under the register isn't just decorative, but it was also where I met Tony, the night security guard who worked the building next door. Tony was probably 60, built like a linebacker gone to seed, and had a protective streak a mile wide. "You're too young to be working these hours," he told me on my first week, appearing at my window around midnight with a cup of coffee. "I'm 18, I said automatically. Tony snorted. "And I'm 35. Try again." I liked him immediately. Tony was the first adult in months who'd called me on my lies but didn't make me feel ashamed of them. "None of my business," he said when I didn't elaborate. "But you got family. People who know where you are?" "No family," I said, which felt truer than any lie I'd told. Tony became my unofficial guardian angel. He'd stop by every night during his rounds, making sure I was okay, sharing coffee and stories about his own complicated family. He never pushed for details about my situation, but his presence made those long, lonely hours feel less dangerous. It was Tony who suggested I get my GED instead of trying to go back to high school. "You're smart enough," he said one night when I was complaining about falling behind. "And you're already more responsible than half the adults I know. Why waste time sitting in classes when you could be getting ahead?" The GED program met twice a week at the community college. I used my McDonald's meal breaks to attend sessions, cramming education between shifts. The other students were mostly older, adults who'd dropped out for various reasons and were trying to get their lives back on track. I fit right in, which should have been depressing, but somehow wasn't. My test scores were high enough that my instructor, Ms. Rodriguez, pulled me aside after the results came in. "Have you thought about college?" she asked. The question was so absurd I almost laughed. College? I was 17, working 2 jobs just to afford rent on a room the size of a closet. College wasn't even in the same universe as my reality. "I can't afford college," I said simply. "There are programs," she said, handing me a folder full of pamphlets. "Community college has financial aid. You could start part-time, take evening classes." I took the folder but didn't have much hope. Still, that night during my gas station shift, I read through everything. Grants, scholarships, work-study programs, a whole world of possibilities I'd never known existed. The application process was daunting, but I was getting good at figuring things out on my own. I filled out form after form, wrote essay after essay about my educational goals and life circumstances. I didn't mention being homeless at 15. I didn't mention my family's betrayal. I wrote about being a motivated student who'd taken a gap year to work and was ready to focus on education. Technically true, just missing a few crucial details. 6 months later, I was accepted into the community college with enough financial aid to cover tuition. I was also promoted to assistant manager at McDonald's, which came with a small raise and more responsibility. I was 18 years old and felt like I'd been living on my own forever. The day I got my acceptance letter, I almost called my parents to tell them. I had their number memorized, could picture Mom's face when she heard I was going to college despite everything they'd put me through. But then I remembered the look of disgust in her eyes that last day. The way she'd said I brought shame to the family. The ease with which they'd thrown me away when Jessica fed them a convenient lie. I deleted their number from my memory instead. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. College was where I learned that being an outsider could actually be an advantage. While my classmates were figuring out how to do laundry and budget for groceries, I was already 3 years ahead on life skills. I took business classes because they seemed practical, but I was drawn to psychology courses too. Understanding people, what motivated them, what made them lie, what made them cruel to those who loved them, had become a survival skill. Professor Williams in my Intro to Business class was the first teacher who really saw potential in me. I turned in a paper on small business marketing strategies that went way beyond the assignment requirements. I'd actually interviewed local business owners about their challenges, including Sandra from McDonald's. "This is graduate-level work," she told me after class. "Have you considered transferring to a 4-year university?" "I can't afford it," I said automatically. That was my answer to most opportunities. "Let me ask you something," she said, settling back in her chair. "If money weren't an obstacle, what would you want to do with your life?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. Even before Jessica's lie destroyed my family life, conversations about my future had been limited to "get good grades" and "don't embarrass us." "I think I'd like to start my own business," I heard myself say. "Something that actually helps people instead of just making money off them." Professor Williams smiled. "There are ways to make that happen. But first, you need to think bigger than community college." She helped me apply for transfer scholarships, wrote recommendation letters, and even connected me with business owners who could offer internships. For the first time since I'd lost my family, an adult was investing in my future without expecting anything in return. I transferred to State University with a partial scholarship and student loans that terrified me but seemed worth the risk. My living situation improved marginally. I shared a tiny off-campus apartment with 2 other students who barely acknowledged my existence, which was perfect. University was harder than community college, but also more rewarding. I double majored in business administration and psychology, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working 20 hours a week at a coffee shop near campus. Junior year, I started my first real business, a tutoring service that matched struggling students with high-performing peers. Simple concept, but I saw how much money students were paying for professional tutoring and realized I could offer the same quality for half the price while paying the tutors better than minimum wage. Within 6 months, I had 15 tutors working for me and a waiting list of clients. "You have good instincts," said Dr. Peterson, no relation to Mrs. Peterson from my old neighborhood, my business strategy professor. "Most students your age think starting a business means having a revolutionary idea. You understood that execution matters more than innovation. The tutoring business taught me about profit margins, customer service, and managing people. It also taught me that I was good at seeing opportunities that others missed. During my senior year, I sold the tutoring business to an education company for enough money to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a small duplex. I lived in one unit and rented out the other, creating my first passive income stream. At 21, I was debt-free and a property owner. Not bad for someone who'd been homeless at 15. Graduation day was bittersweet. I had nobody there to watch me walk across the stage, but I'd learned to celebrate my achievements privately. I took myself to dinner at the nicest restaurant I could afford and toasted my degree with expensive wine. "To surviving," I said to my reflection in the restaurant window. But surviving wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to thrive. After graduation, I moved to the city and took a job with a marketing firm. The pay was decent, but more importantly, I was learning how successful businesses really operated. I watched my boss close deals, studied how he managed clients, and absorbed everything I could about scaling operations. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted twice and was managing accounts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I was also developing my own client base on the side, providing marketing consulting for small businesses. My boss eventually found out about my side business. "Mia," he called me into his office on a Wednesday morning that I was sure would end with me getting fired. "I understand you've been freelancing," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Yes, sir," I said. "No point in lying." "Good for you," he said, surprising me completely. "When are you planning to go out on your own?" What? "You're too good to work for someone else forever," he said. "And frankly, I'd rather help you launch successfully than pretend I don't see what's happening." He offered to be my first major client when I started my own firm, and to recommend me to his network. It was the kind of generous gesture that still caught me off guard when it came from adults. At 24, I opened MK Marketing Solutions. Within 3 years, I had 12 employees and clients in 3 states. Within 5 years, I was a millionaire. I was 29 years old and had built everything myself, from nothing. Sometimes I wondered what my parents would think if they could see me now. But mostly, I was too busy building my life to waste time on people who'd thrown me away. By 32, I wasn't just successful. I was the kind of successful that made business magazines write profiles with headlines like, "Self-made millionaire reveals her success secrets." MK Marketing Solutions had become one of the most respected boutique firms in the region. We specialized in helping small and medium businesses compete with larger corporations through strategic digital marketing and brand positioning. It was satisfying work that actually made a difference, which mattered more to me than just making money. Though I'll admit, the money was nice too. I'd bought a house in the historic district. Nothing flashy. Just a beautifully restored 1920s colonial with a home office and enough space for the life I'd built. I traveled when I wanted to, drove a reliable car that I'd paid cash for, and had the kind of financial security that most people only dream about. But perhaps more importantly, I'd built something that couldn't be taken away from me. My business, my reputation, my skills, they were mine in a way that family love had never been. I was at my office late one Thursday evening, reviewing proposals for a new client, when my assistant Jennifer buzzed in. "Mia, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your sister." The words hit me like cold water. I hadn't heard from Jessica in 14 years. For all I knew, she could have been living on Mars. "Did she give you a name?" I asked, stalling. "Jessica. She said you'd know her." I considered having Jennifer tell her I wasn't available. It would have been the smart thing to do, but curiosity won over caution. "Send her in," I said. Jessica walked into my office like she owned the place, which was rich considering the last time I'd seen her. She'd owned me instead. She looked good. Designer clothes, professional haircut, the confidence that comes from never having to doubt whether you'll have a roof over your head tonight. "Mia," she said with a smile that was probably supposed to seem warm, "you look amazing. Success suits you." I didn't stand up or offer her a seat. "What do you want, Jessica?" She laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl with familiarity. Straight to the point, just like always. Can't I just want to see my sister? Not for 14 years you couldn't. Her expression flickered slightly, but she recovered quickly. I know we have things to work through. I know you're probably angry. Angry? I leaned back in my chair and really looked at her. Jessica, I was a homeless teenager because of you. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. You weren't homeless, she said quickly. You had choices. You could have come back any time if you'd just admitted. Admitted to what? My voice was deadly quiet. To being pregnant with a baby that didn't exist? To having an affair with a man I'd barely spoken to? To the lie you made up for reasons I still don't understand? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mom and Dad are getting older, she said finally, switching tactics. They miss you. I almost laughed. They miss me? The daughter who supposedly brought shame to their family? The one they threw out without asking a single question? People change, Jessica said. They've realized maybe they were too hasty. Too hasty, I repeated, like it was a parking ticket, not throwing away their child. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't going the way she'd planned, and I found myself enjoying her discomfort more than I probably should have. What do you really want? I asked again. She sighed and dropped the act. Look, things have been tough lately. Mom needs some medical procedures, and Dad's business isn't doing well. I thought, since you've obviously done well for yourself, and there it was. The real reason for this reunion. Money. You want me to financially support the people who disowned me, I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. It's what family does, she said, and the irony was so thick I could taste it. I stood up, walked to my window that overlooked the city I'd conquered through sheer determination. Jessica, let me tell you about family. Family doesn't throw out children based on lies. Family asks questions. Family gives the benefit of the doubt. Family supports each other through difficult times. I turned back to face her. You and our parents taught me that blood relation means nothing without trust, respect, and love. So congratulations. You successfully taught me that you're not my family. Her face hardened. You can't stay angry forever. Mia, it's not healthy. I'm not angry, I said honestly. I'm indifferent. You're a stranger who shares my DNA, asking for money from someone whose life you helped destroy. The answer is no. She stood up, her composure finally cracking. You used to be such a sweet girl. What happened to you? I smiled for the first time since she'd walked in. I grew up, thanks to you. After she left, I sat in my office as the city lights flickered on below. I felt lighter somehow, like closing a book I'd been carrying around for years. I was 32 years old, successful, and completely at peace with the family I'd chosen to build instead of the one I'd been born into. What I didn't know was that Jessica's visit was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. 2 months after Jessica's surprise visit, my carefully constructed life received another shock, but this time, it wasn't from my family. I was having lunch with my client, Rebecca Martinez, owner of a successful catering company, when she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. You know, the strangest thing happened last week, Rebecca said, cutting into her salad. My friend Linda. You remember Linda, the one who owns the flower shop? She told me the most ridiculous gossip about her ex-husband. My hand froze halfway to my coffee cup. Rebecca was talking casually, unaware that she was about to detonate a bomb. Apparently, Linda was going through old financial records for their divorce settlement. This was years ago, but her lawyer needed documentation, and she found these charges on their joint credit card from when she was out of town visiting her sick mother. Hotel rooms, expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases, all from about 14 years ago. The room started spinning. I forced myself to keep breathing normally. The weird part is, Rebecca continued, Linda remembered that time period specifically because that's when there was all that drama with the Gardner family. You know the Gardners? Tom Gardner owns the hardware store downtown. I knew exactly who Tom Gardner was. More importantly, I knew exactly what Rebecca was about to tell me. Linda's ex-husband was supposedly having an affair with their teenager daughter. At least that's what everyone said at the time. The whole family imploded over it. But looking at these receipts, Rebecca paused to sip her drink. Linda realized the affair wasn't with the teenager. It was with the older daughter, who was already 21 and definitely old enough to know better. The coffee cup rattled against my saucer as I set it down. My hands were shaking. Linda confronted her ex about it last week when she found the evidence. He finally admitted everything. Apparently, he'd been seeing Jessica Gardner for months, not the younger girl. But when his wife almost caught them, Jessica panicked and convinced him to let her younger sister take the blame. Said it would blow over faster if everyone thought it was just a teen making bad choices. The restaurant felt like it was closing in on me. 14 years of wondering, 14 years of carrying that confusion and pain, and the answer had been hidden in a credit card statement all along. The really awful part, Rebecca said, oblivious to my internal collapse. Is that the younger girl? Mia, I think? She ended up homeless after her parents kicked her out. Meanwhile, Jessica just went on with her life like nothing happened. Linda said she feels terrible about not speaking up sooner, but she didn't want to get involved in family drama. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was successful, confident, in control of her life. But underneath, I was still that confused 15-year-old girl, asking why her sister had destroyed her world. Now I knew. Jessica had been having an affair with a married man. When they almost got caught, she'd sacrificed me to save herself. Not because she hated me, not because of some deep-seated rivalry, but because it was convenient. I was the expendable one. I returned to lunch, finished my meeting with Rebecca, and drove home in a daze. That evening, I sat in my home office and did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. I need to know everything about what happened 14 years ago, I told him. I need proof. 3 weeks later, he delivered a file that confirmed what Rebecca had told me. Credit card receipts, hotel records, witness statements from people who'd seen Jessica and Tom Gardner together. Even a photo from a restaurant's security camera, time-stamped and undeniable. The affair had lasted 8 months. Jessica had been careful, but not careful enough. When Tom's wife Linda started getting suspicious, Jessica had made a calculated decision to throw me under the bus to protect herself. I stared at the evidence spread across my desk and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because the truth was good, but because it finally made sense. Jessica hadn't destroyed my life out of malice or jealousy. She'd done it out of self-preservation, like someone pushing their sibling off a lifeboat to save themselves. It was almost worse than hatred. At least hatred was personal. This was just practical. The ironic part? The truth was about to come out anyway, 14 years too late. Linda was done keeping secrets to protect people who had never cared about the damage they'd caused. She was telling everyone who would listen about her ex-husband's lies and Jessica's manipulation. By the time the truth reached my parents, it would be too humiliating to ignore. The whole town would know that they'd thrown out the wrong daughter. I didn't have to do anything. Justice, as it turned out, had its own timeline. I was about to learn that vindication feels very different when you no longer need it to heal. The truth has a funny way of surfacing when you least expect it. Linda Gardner, yes, that Linda Gardner, Tom's wife, had apparently spent years living with suspicion gnawing at her like a persistent headache. But it wasn't until their divorce proceedings required a deep dive into old financial records that she found the smoking gun she'd been unconsciously looking for. I learned all this because Rebecca couldn't help herself from calling me with updates. Apparently, Linda had confronted Tom the night she found those credit card statements, armed with 14 years of accumulated doubt and finally having proof. "You should have heard her," Rebecca told me over the phone, her voice vibrating with gossip-fueled excitement. Linda marched right into Tom's apartment, yes, they're separated now, and slammed those receipts down on his kitchen table, asked him to explain why he was buying jewelry and paying for hotel rooms when she was out of town caring for her dying mother. I was sitting in my home office, supposedly reviewing quarterly reports, but Rebecca's call had my complete attention. At first, he tried to deny it. She continued, said maybe someone stole his card information, but Linda had done her homework. She had dates, times, amounts. Everything matched up perfectly with when she was away, and Jessica was supposedly working late at that boutique job she had. The boutique job. I remembered that. Jessica had been so proud of her part-time retail position, acting like she was some kind of fashion mogul. Turns out she was using it as cover for her affair. When Linda threatened to take the evidence to a lawyer, Rebecca said, Tom finally broke down and admitted everything. The whole affair, start to finish. But here's the really sick part, Mia. When Linda asked him about the rumors that destroyed your family, Tom told her the truth. Jessica convinced him to let you take the blame because it would be easier for everyone if people thought it was just a teenager making bad choices. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Easier for everyone. Everyone except the 15-year-old who lost her family, her home, and her childhood in one night. Linda lost it, Rebecca continued. Completely lost it. She told Tom that he and Jessica destroyed an innocent kid's life to save their own skins. She called them both monsters. I had to hand it to Linda. Better late than never, I suppose. But the real bombshell came next. Linda's done keeping their secret, Rebecca said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She's telling everyone, and I mean everyone. She started with Tom's business partners, then moved on to the church congregation, then the PTA moms. She even posted about it on Facebook. My coffee went cold in my hands as I processed this. After 14 years of living with their lie, the truth was finally coming out. Not because I'd fought for it or demanded justice, but because Linda Gardner had reached her breaking point. What exactly is she saying? I asked. The truth. That Tom had an affair with Jessica Gardner, not her teenage sister. That they let an innocent girl get thrown out of her home to protect themselves. That everyone in town participated in destroying a child based on lies. The irony was almost too perfect. Jessica had sacrificed me to save her reputation, and now Linda was sacrificing Jessica's reputation to restore mine. The cosmic justice of it was almost beautiful. How are people reacting? I asked, though I could guess. Oh, Mia. Rebecca's voice was rich with satisfaction. People are furious, especially the mothers. The idea that a grown woman would let a teenager take the blame for her affair? It's not playing well. Jessica's name is mud around here. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below because this story is about to take another dramatic turn. I hung up with Rebecca and sat in my quiet office, processing this development. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like to be vindicated, to have everyone know the truth. I'd pictured myself feeling triumphant, justified, maybe even smug. Instead, I felt empty. Not sad, not angry, just hollow. Like someone had handed me a prize for a race I'd stopped caring about years ago. The phone rang again an hour later. This time it was my assistant, Jennifer. Mia, there's a woman online too claiming to be your mother. She sounds upset. My mother. The woman who'd looked at me with disgust and told me I'd brought shame to the family. The woman who'd chosen to believe Jessica's lies without asking a single question. I stared at the blinking light on my phone for a full minute, my finger hovering over the button. After 14 years of silence, what could she possibly have to say? I picked up the phone. This is Mia. Mia? Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Fragile. Mia, honey, is that really you? Honey. Like we'd talked yesterday. Like she hadn't thrown me away like garbage when I was 15. Hello, Mom. The silence stretched between us, filled with 14 years of unspoken pain. We need to talk, she said finally. Your father and I, we need to see you. There are things we need to say. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city I'd conquered without them. I'm listening. Not over the phone, she said quickly. Please. Can we meet somewhere? Anywhere you want. We'll come to you. They'll come to me. How generous of them. But curiosity won over caution, just like it had with Jessica 2 months ago. Fine, I said. Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll text you the address. After I hung up, I realized I was smiling, not with happiness, but with anticipation. 14 years ago, they'd held all the power. They'd made their judgment and executed their sentence without giving me a voice. Now they were coming to me, hat in hand, ready to face the consequences of their choices. Oh, how the mighty had fallen. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes everything feel dramatic and significant. I chose to meet them at Meridian, the upscale restaurant where I often entertained clients. Neutral territory, but definitely my turf. I arrived 15 minutes early and selected a corner table where I could watch the entrance. Power Moves 101, courtesy of 14 years of learning how to control situations instead of being at their mercy. At exactly 2 o'clock, they walked in. I almost didn't recognize them. My parents had aged in ways that went beyond simple time. Dad's shoulders were stooped, his hair completely gray now. Mom looked smaller somehow, diminished, wearing an expression of nervous uncertainty that was completely foreign on her once confident face. They spotted me immediately, probably because I was the only person in the restaurant who looked like I belonged there. Success had given me a polish that was impossible to miss. Mia, Mom breathed as they approached the table. You look successful, I finished for her, standing to shake hands rather than offering hugs. Let's keep this professional. Dad's handshake was firm, but his eyes were troubled. You've done well for yourself, he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been pride if it wasn't 14 years too late. We sat down, ordered drinks, and endured several minutes of painful small talk about the weather and how nice the restaurant was. Finally, Mom cleared her throat. I suppose you've heard, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. About Jessica's affair with Tom Gardner? Yes, I heard. Dad flinched like I'd slapped him. Mia, we had no idea. That your golden child was capable of lying? I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I seem to remember Jessica having quite a talent for creative storytelling. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We failed you. We failed you so completely, and we don't know how to begin to apologize. You could start by admitting what you did, I said calmly. Not what happened to me. Not what Jessica did. What you did. They looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. We threw you out, Dad said finally, his voice hoarse. We threw out our own daughter without asking questions, without investigating, without giving you a chance to defend yourself. We chose to believe the worst about you, Mom added, tears starting to fall. We abandoned you when you needed us most. I sipped my wine and waited. They weren't done yet. The The whole town knows now, Dad continued. Everyone's talking about it. About what really happened, about what Jessica did, about how He stopped, unable to finish. About how you destroyed your own child to protect your reputation, I said helpfully. Yes, I imagine that's quite the conversation starter. Mom winced. People have been calling, some to apologize for believing the lies, others to express their opinions about our parenting. I almost smiled. Almost. The same people who'd whispered about the scandal 14 years ago were now turning their judgment on my parents. Public opinion was a fickle beast. Mrs. Henderson from church called yesterday, Mom said. She said she always wondered why we never fought for you, never questioned Jessica's story. She said any parent worth their salt would have asked more questions. Mrs. Henderson is right. We know, Dad said. We know. And we're so sorry, Mia. We're so goddamn sorry. It was the first time I'd ever heard my father swear. When we found out the truth, Mom continued, we started looking back at everything. All the signs we missed. All the times Jessica's stories didn't quite add up. The money that disappeared from my purse. The neighbor's packages that went missing when she was the only one home. The way she could turn any family conflict into being about her. You started to see the pattern, I said. A pattern we should have seen years ago, Dad said bitterly. But it was easier to believe her version of events. Jessica always made herself the victim or the hero. You just took whatever came your way without complaining. I was the easy target, I said matter-of-factly. I didn't fight back, didn't create drama, didn't demand attention. When Jessica needed someone to blame, I was convenient. The waiter approached to refill our drinks, and we all sat in silence until he left. We tried to find you, Mom said quietly. After we learned the truth, we tried to track you down, but you'd disappeared completely. I didn't disappear, I corrected. I built a new life, without you. A successful life, Dad observed, gesturing around the restaurant. You've clearly done very well for yourself. No thanks to my family. The words hung in the air like a challenge. We want to make this right, Mom said desperately. We want to be part of your life again, if you'll let us. I leaned back in my chair and studied their faces. They looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely devastated by the truth they'd finally been forced to confront. But I wasn't 15 anymore. I wasn't desperate for their approval or their love. I'd learned to live without both. What about Jessica? I asked. They exchanged another look, and I saw my answer before they spoke. She's been having a hard time, Mom said carefully. People are being very cruel to her. She's had to quit her job, and she's been staying with us while she figures out what to do next. Of course she was. Even now, even after the truth had come out, they were still protecting her. So let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You want to apologize to me for throwing me out based on her lies, but you're still taking care of her after those lies have been exposed. She's in a difficult situation, Dad said weakly. She's in a difficult situation because she destroyed an innocent person's life to save herself, I snapped. She's facing consequences for her actions. Novel concept, right? They both looked uncomfortable, caught between their guilt over me and their ingrained habit of protecting Jessica. We can work through this, Mom said pleadingly. All of us. As a family. I smiled then, and it wasn't a nice smile. Mom, we stopped being a family the night you chose Jessica's lies over your own daughter. You can't unring that bell. The truth was finally out there, exactly as detailed in the synopsis. But as I sat across from my parents, watching them squirm with their newfound knowledge, I realized something important. Their regret couldn't undo the damage they'd caused, and their continued protection of Jessica proved they still didn't understand what they'd really lost. 2 weeks after our restaurant meeting, my parents started calling daily. Not demanding or accusatory like the old days, but tentative, almost pleading. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Updates about their lives, questions about mine that I answered politely but vaguely, and carefully worded invitations to come home for holidays or family dinners. I let most of the calls go to voicemail. The messages painted a picture of their new reality. Dad's hardware business was struggling because people were taking their money elsewhere, rather than support someone who'd abandoned his own child. Mom had been quietly asked to step